ಬಂದಾನೋ ಬಂದ ಸವಾರ ಯಾವ ಊರಿನ ಸರದಾರ.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ರಂಗಶಂಕರದಲ್ಲಿ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಪ್ರಯೋಗದಲ್ಲಿ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಯ ಬರದಂತೆ ದಯಮಾಡಿ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಫೋನ್ಗಳನ್ನು ಸ್ವಿಚ್ ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡಿ. ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್ ಟು ರಂಗಶಂಕರ. ವುಡ್ ಯು ಪ್ಲೀಸ್ ಸ್ವಿಚ್ ಆಫ್ ಯುವರ್ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಫೋನ್ಸ್ so there is no disturbance during the performance.
Heard that unmistakable voice. Yes, Girish Karnad making that frightening announcement to everybody at Rangashankara just before the show saying, come on guys, switch off your telephones or else. Today is Girish's birthday. He would have been 83 years old today, and we at Rangashankara thought, come on, let's share a few things that are there with us, a lot of memories that are with us, share a few of his friends, pull them in, ask them to share a good memory of working with him or an insight into his works. Not too many of them. This is just like coming out in a garden like this and picking up different flowers, putting them together, making a little bouquet and sharing them with all of you. So enjoy the next 45 minutes to an hour. We will show you a few clippings from our art appreciation course where friends have spoken about his writing, the politics in his writing, the women in his writing. Some have shared the first moments of meeting him on a beach when he got his first role in theatre. It's going to be fun. Yes, we miss Girish, but we are so grateful for the wonderful plays he left us with. So grateful for the wonderful times we got to spend with this great man who shared without being stingy. If we learnt about Dostoevsky or about Sartre or learnt about critiquing something, he learnt a lot of that from Girish. Thank you, Girish. Thank you very much.
I was about to go to England at that time. I was 22 years old. I had got a Rhodes Scholarship, and there was a great deal of tension. Going to England in those days, this is in 1958-59, was not like going to England today. People go and come. It took 3 weeks to go, 3 weeks to come. Once you went there, you were there for 3 years. You couldn't come back because you went by ship. And you were there for 3 years. At the age of 22 meant you got involved with some white girl or something. You know, the family was scared stiff that you would have an involvement. So there were tensions. The family wanted you to come back. You felt that the world was out there. I could do them, and you know. So there were these tensions between what my parents wanted and what I wanted, which is when I read Rajaji's Mahabharata, and in that the Yayati story occurs. I read and said, marvelous, and it just poured out. It just poured out, dictated and so on. So this is the other point I want to make. It was the easiest play I wrote. I wrote it out in 3 weeks. And that's why I want to take an example. The point is, the fact that it was easily written doesn't mean that it's easily constructed. You know, you need to, it's a craft that you need to learn.
I was with Madras Players a long time back, in the 60s. This was before Girish joined Madras Players. I want to tell you about that. My husband, Krishnamurthy, he was putting on a play on the beachfront in Madras, Night of the Iguana, Tennessee Williams. And we were one character short. And some friends of ours who were acting in the play, they said they knew someone and they'd bring him along. They said, this chap has just come back from Oxford and he's joined the OUP, Oxford University Press. So the next day they brought along Girish. It was a small part. It was a beach boy, a walk-on, silent beach boy. I guess Girish did it as well as anybody else. Girish acted in and directed a lot of the plays that Madras Players put on. And as the years went by and Girish became famous with his plays, Madras Players became synonymous with Girish Karnad's name. I mean, if I said to somebody, I'm with Madras Players, they'd say, oh, Girish Karnad's group. Maybe to some extent that was okay because Girish initiated a very important change in the direction that Madras Players was going. You see, we were a motley group of theatre enthusiasts from different states, different languages, and our only common language was English. So we'd do Shakespeare, Beckett, Brecht, Tennessee Williams, and so on and so forth. And this was also a time when wonderful plays were being done in the Indian languages, Bengali, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, and of course Kannada. Girish translated Eva Mindrajit, Badal Sarkar's Eva Mindrajit, in English, and we put on the play, and it was a huge success. You know, there was a marvelous magazine then called Enact. Rajendra Paul was the editor, and they translated all the language plays into English. And these plays got their first enactment by Madras Players in English. Oh, it was an exhilarating time, I must say. I acted only one play that Girish directed. It was Jean-Paul Sartre's In Camera. The play is about three people, homosexual, a nymphomaniac, and a lesbian. This was Sartre's language and language of the 60s. Those terms are no now. But anyway, this was a play about how each of these people is hell for the others. They never sleep. And that is hell. So after a few rehearsals, Girish called me aside and he said, look, you're trying to steal the show. Actually, I was. And he gave me a firing. He said, you've got to keep a balance. You can't run away with the show. And I went away subdued. And now recently, some 8-10 months back, Vishalam and I were nostalgic about the past. And she said, you know, when we did In Camera, you know what Girish did? He took me aside and he said, look, you're trying to steal the show. She wasn't that type. But she said, and he scolded me and he said, there's got to be a balance. You can't run away with the show and so on and so forth. So I don't know if he did the same thing with Matthew. Girish wrote so many plays of different types and successful plays. But he always said that he got to know of the nitty-gritty, the craft of theatre, with his hands-on experience with Madras Players. Those were good times.
You know, the idea that India is a nation. Now, what does a nation mean? A nation means it has a cultural unity. Unfortunately, our country was not only born as a nation, but it was born as two nations. So that we're obsessed with the fact that we may get divided. So everything had to be found to one source. So there was in Delhi an official body created which defined what culture was and helped to, it was very useful in many things. I will not sneer at it. For many forms which should have died out. Kudiyattam is an example, which would have died out, which survived. Because there was this central... well, let me tell you, since I'm speaking to you, let me take credit for what I've done. I was this Sangeet Natak Academy chairman when someone called Appukuttan Nair came to me and he said to me, Mr. Karnad, if the Sangeet Natak Academy doesn't do anything, Kudiyattam is going to die in the next 3 years because there's only one guru left, Chakyar, and he's 82 years old. So he said, how is that possible? I mean, the Sangeet Natak Academy chairman before me was a Malayali, Menon, didn't you know? Oh, he was only interested in Bharatanatyam. I mean, everyone has a taste and so on. So I asked the ministry that whether we could give money, and the ministry said, you have to apply to the ministry. Now that I knew what it meant. It would probably, the money would come by the time not only the Chakya, but even his children would probably be dead. So my secretary, Keshav
Kothari and I sat down, we worked out a chart, gave 5 lakhs, signed a document, which we were not authorized. We had no money, but there was no other way to do it. We signed an official document with the Kudiyatam school, Margi, and gave them 5 lakhs. No 5 lakhs to be given, but it was there on paper. Of course, the government hit the roof and they said, but you have no right to give, you have no money. We said, quite right, now what shall we do? Because if you withdraw this, there will be a bigger rumpus now. You know, that you've taken money, Chakyar is 82 years old and so on. So he said, oh God, you've been very clever, but he sanctioned the 5 lakhs. You see, people are not stupid, but someone has to take the decision. Even in this, it is not lack of imagination in the government that holds it back. What holds it back is cowardice. People will not put their neck on the block. You know, if tomorrow someone turns around and says, who is responsible for that decision? They want to be able to say, oh no, there was a second secretary's signature below that. But if you take risks, as I found in the Sangeet Natak Academy and so on, you can get away with murder. Because there's a lot of
Sri Girish Karnad was highly responsible for giving a new lease of life to Kudiyatam, the Sanskrit theatre. Kudiyatam is a traditional Sanskrit theatre. It survived only in Kerala. And in 2001, UNESCO recognized this as the intangible heritage. That was the first list of intangible heritage of performing arts. Then UNESCO made it. Kudiyatam became one of that. But in 1988, when Girish Karnad became the chairman of the Sangeet Natak Academy, we just came back from Japan after a very successful performance series under the able leadership of Guru Aman Madhav Chakyar. We performed everywhere in Japan. And after returning, when I heard that Girishji became the chairman, I immediately sent all the brochures and everything to him with a detailed letter of the present condition of Kudiyatam. He immediately took action. Those days, Dr. Kiran Seth was a member of the academy, and he requested Kiran to travel in Kerala and submit a detailed report about Kudiyatam. Kiran Seth came here, also met all the artists and submitted a detailed report. Then, immediately after that, Academy took action for the support to Kudiyatam training and many things. Many of the younger generation of Kudiyatam at present, who is performing very well, who came out from our Amanur Chachu Chakyar Smaraya Gurukula, is the result of that training. It was wonderful, and he always, when he is in town, he come to see the Kudiyatam performances, especially when we presented under the auspices of Ranga Shankara. If Girishji is there in town, he always come and witness the performance. And whenever I met him in Delhi or somewhere, he always remember about Kudiyatam. He was a great person, not only of a great playwright and director, but he was also a supporter of a traditional theatre like Kudiyatam. That is something we always remember with gratitude. I have recorded this event in my book, Into the World of Kudiyatam, about Girishji long ago. So I am happy that Ranga Shankara is organizing an event in his memory.
Now, when one tries to take a look at Tughlaq from 1964. We all have memories because we are virtually contemporaries of Girish. Girish is 2 years older than me. So we were going through the same experiences. And 64 was a year of shock, pain, despair, frustration for a lot of us. 64 was the year that Jawaharlal Nehru died. Things were falling apart. The expectations that came with the tryst with destiny in 1947, in 64, everything was falling apart. And we were looking back at what had happened, and we were becoming politicized by the history, by that moment in history. It is a politicization through which we were moving at that point of time. And Tughlaq was very much a product of that time, product of that moment. It was, at its first impact on us, the story of Nehru, who thought that he had wonderful ideals which he could realize. But there was also the factor that throughout the national movement, the struggle for independence, there were so many political issues, issues of the center and the margins, geographically, ecologically, in terms of human experiences and human being, which had not been addressed during the freedom movement. They were all driven under the carpet, and there was this attempt to reach a general consensus. Let's not get into these differences. Let's not get into them so that we can all stand together and get rid of the colonial masters, and then we'll take care of those. Years had been lost. Years had been wasted. You can't let these hard political realities just drifting along while we thought about some great dream of freedom. So there was an expectation immediately on the 15th of August 1947 that it's time to address these issues immediately and take care of them. It didn't happen. The compromise continued. And that's how history operates. If you let years go by compromising, compromise takes over. And you just can't start one fine morning and say, now, we're going to put our minds to that and solve all these problems. It can't happen. So in 1964, till the last moment of Nehru's life, there's some hope, some dream that this man will deliver. It was over in 1964. And somehow, what I find in Tughlaq, what we found in Tughlaq when we read it in 64 at that historic juncture, was the sense that, well, this was our mad prophet, dreams unrealized, not just unrealized, but not being able to deliver, not being able to realize the dreams, had led to a whole system, a system of corruption. And how brilliantly Girish hits on it right at the beginning, if you remember, in the first scene, when Azam and Aziz emerge significantly out of the mob. Two figures come out. The first two figures with names. The rest of them were nameless. The old man, the young man, the Brahmin, the third man. And then, suddenly, they emerge. And one of them appears first as the Brahmin who turns into Aziz. And it was a brilliant piece of theatric metamorphosis, exemplifying policy metamorphosing into politics.
ಈ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ವರ್ಣಲತೆಯಂತಹ ಪಾತ್ರವನ್ನು ನಾನು ತುಂಬಾ ಮೆಚ್ಚಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದು. ಹೌದಪ್ಪ, ಯಾರ ಜೊತೆಗೋ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇತ್ತು, ಏನೀಗ, ಬಟ್ ಇವತ್ತು ನಿನ್ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಬದುಕಿದ್ದೀನಲ್ಲ ನಾನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವಂತಹ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಆಡುವ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಕಾರ್ನಾಡರು ನನಗೆ ಒದಗಿಸಿಕೊಡ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ನಂಗೆ ಅದು ತುಂಬಾ ಹಿಡಿಸಿದಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಪಾತ್ರ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟಪಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಹಾಗೇನೆ ಆ ಹಯವದನದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಶಾಂತತಾಯಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಯಾಕೆ ಒಂದೇ ದೇಹದ ಜೊತೆ ಅಂಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನುವ ಮೂಲಭೂತ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಯನ್ನೇನೆ ಕಾರ್ನಾಡ್ರು ಇಡೀ ಸಮಾಜಕ್ಕೆ ಎಸ್ಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲೇನೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಗಂಡಿಗೆ ಆ ಮೌಲ್ಯಗಳು ಅಷ್ಟಾಗಿ ಕಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಆದ್ರೆ ಹೆಣ್ಣಿಗೆ ಅದು ಕಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಇರುವಂತಹ ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳನ್ನ ಮಾಡೋ ಅಂಥದ್ದು. ಬಹುಶಃ ಕಾರ್ನಾಡರ ಕೃತಿಗಳ ಮರು ವ್ಯಾಖ್ಯಾನದ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಮೂಲ ಆಶಯದ ಲೈಂಗಿಕತೆಯನ್ನ ಪ್ರತಿರೋಧವಾಗಿ ಬಳಸಿದಂಥವುದನ್ನ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ಕ್ರಿಯೆಯನ್ನ ಅಥವಾ ಸೆಕ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಗ್ಲೋರಿಫೈ ಮಾಡುವಂತಹ ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳು ಬಹುಶಃ ನನಗಂತೂ ಸಮಂಜಸ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ಗ್ರಹಿಕೆಯ ಕೊರತೆಯೋ ಅಥವಾ ಜನರೇಷನ್ನಿನ ಗ್ಯಾಪು ನನಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಕಾರ್ನಾಡರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೃತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಅವರ ಆಡಾಡ್ತ ಆಯುಷ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ಕೊಂಡಿರುವಂತಹ ಅಂಶಗಳನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡಂತೆನೆ ಲೈಂಗಿಕತೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಕೇವಲ ಪುರುಷನ ಅಧಿಕಾರ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಹೆಣ್ಣಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವಳ ದೇಹದ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಧಿಕಾರವೂ ಇದೆ, ಅದನ್ನು ಅಭಿವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗೊಳಿಸುವ ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯವೂ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನುವ ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿರೋಧದ ನೆಲೆಯಾಗಿ ಹೆಣ್ಣಿನ ಲೈಂಗಿಕತೆಯ ಸಂದರ್ಭವನ್ನ ಅವರ ಎಲ್ಲ ನಾಟಕಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಗುರುತಿಸ್ತೀನಿ, ಆಸ್ವಾದಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಮತ್ತು ಒಪ್ತೀನಿ ಕೂಡ.
I still remember that when my generation read Yayati in Kannada for the first time, and we came of age in the 70s, it made a huge impact on us. Whatever may have been Girish Karnad's own reservations about the play. Now, what we discovered while reading the play was that it was not Puru who was speaking for our generation. It was the four women who were speaking for our generation, because these four women in Yayati, trapped as they were in a highly patriarchal kind of society with all those so-called Kshatriya and Brahmin norms, here were women who had discovered their own voices, and they were speaking so very honestly and authentically about what they were and what they were trying to explore and what they were trying to understand. Please remember that this was happening in this play, a very powerful play, quite some time before anything called feminism made its impact on Kannada writing. And we felt that we had not heard such voices in Kannada drama. And these women, they were speaking of things about which there was some kind of a consensual taboo. These are not things that one talks about. I'm talking about the 70s. And they were talking about their sexual desires. They were talking about their own being very uncomfortable with the constraints which are on them, etc., etc. So this discovery, in fact, led us to reread the Kannada texts and try to understand where we could place Girish Karnad, because we felt that after Shivaram Karan's very wonderful little novel, Sarsamana Samadhi, here was one of the major dramatic texts. And what made it very important, and what I think Girish Karnad continued to explore in his later plays, was to find a way between, a kind of a card-holding, pro-woman kind of a writing, and the other where the male writer has this kind of a propensity or a vulnerability to turn a woman into only a sexualized body, hoping that this itself would be an image of resistance to patriarchy. The great thing about Girish was that he was able to avoid these two possibilities. One, as I said, was to hold up an ideological card and then create pasteboard characters of women. The women in Girish Karnad, they speak for themselves. They are trying to discover themselves. But while doing that, across these so many generations and so many yugas, as one could say, from out of the boundaries of the Puranas and the myths, they spoke to us like contemporaries, and that is extremely important. It's not a question of being very anachronistic and trying to choose some stray character from the past and thrust your opinions. The impact that these women made on us was almost visceral, as though they were making an impact on your body as a spectator, because they were full-blooded human beings, and they were presenting to us those zones of experience were not really imagined. At least were not imagined that this could happen on the stage of the theater. And Girish continued to do that. And when we watched B.V. Karan's, production of Hayavadana, I think it happened in Dharwad. I can remember how mesmerized we were by Padmini, was so very central to that play, because she was not just speaking about the freedom of choice. She was not even speaking about the freedom of a woman to seek her own fulfillment. She was actually part of this very deep philosophical probing in the play about the incompleteness of the human beings, and then the way you keep groping, and then you don't really end up finding what you are looking for. These are all there about the existential condition of human beings. But in the midst of that, here was Padmini, who was speaking out and articulating, which we felt that a whole culture had been trying to do. I'm not saying that this had never happened in Kannada society and culture, but at least for our generation, these were thoughts which were there as a very powerful undercurrent, and we wanted these metaphors and images which could crystallize what we were going through in our age group. And this happened with somebody like Padmini, and who was talking about Kapila, who was talking about Devadatta, and who was trying to, in a way, talk about something that we felt that our generation was also confronting. And this, I think, continued to happen in the later plays also, when he goes back to one of the classics of Kannada literature, Yashodhara Charite, and then later it was translated as Bali, the sacrifice, much later. But for the Kannada readers and the audience, this the confrontation between the queen and her husband, with all these memories of the readings we had as Kannada readers, where Janna himself was trying to question how adequate a religion can be, and how adequate, these ideas of trying to renounce one's desires could be in the real human world. And that's what we were able to see in Karnad's play, through the challenges that the queen throws up, not just to the restrictions and the constraints on the feminine sexuality, but also on how religion itself may not be adequate at all to answer the needs of the human beings. So in this way, though of course in the historical plays the women had a slightly diminished presence, Karnad was able to do this to us, in the sense tell us that continuously there has been this production of images and metaphors from the ancient times to the present, where you find someone who is speaking for us, and that in Kannada happens to be the women. And lastly, what I personally felt as very important in Kannada's plays is that these women are always on the point of transgression, you know. As we say, a culture hero or a culture heroine should be someone who transgresses and trespasses. And this is what the women in Karnad were. It's not just a question of breaking the norms, you know. It's a question of trying to pass on to a territory that one has not spoken about, where the words and images have not been created for that. And that I think made very big impact on us as the readers of Girish Karnad. And one has to be grateful to Karnad for initiating those things, which as a Kannada critic, I can say with confidence, were not immediately recognized in Kannada, but the impact was very much there. And now in retrospect, one could say that the humanist stance which gradually emerged in Kannada writing has this legacy, the legacy of Karnad's plays.
ನೀರಿನ ಮೇಲೆ ಚಿತ್ರ ಕೆತ್ತಲಿಕ್ಕಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಕತ್ತಿಯ ಗಾಯ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ.
I remember in 1989, while flipping through a magazine, I came across Girish Karnad's newest play called Nagamandala. Somehow the theme attracted me, and I recall writing a postcard to him, requesting him if I could have the English version of his Kannada play. When the play came, I was overwhelmed because I felt so grateful to him that he trusted an unknown director with his latest script. What really fascinated me about the whole text was this whole concept of duality, the world of dreams, the world of imagination. Do we imagine it or does it really happen? This whole thing about myth, folk, and high realism was dovetailed in a manner which was so intricate and so layered that images chased one another. When I think of some of the complex devices that he used, like the chorus of flames, which is what happens when you blow off your diya or switch off your light or turn down the lantern. What happens to the light? Where does it go? A very metaphysical concept that was very exciting to explore. Also the whole concept of the story which is nurturing within us, which needs to find a way to manifest itself, seemed like very unusual theatrical devices and challenged just about every creative dimension in my being. And this whole thing of the transformation of the husband into a snake lover through the magic potion, despite the fact that it is based on two Kannada folk tales, it had a resonance and it had a sense of being completely contemporary because it dealt with the whole world of desire. Moments of love, moments of happiness, do they really happen or do we imagine them? I worked with a very eminent poet of Punjab called Surjit Pathar, who I think did an excellent job of translating it, adapting it into the Punjabi ethos, using imagery from Karnad's play, but in a certain way coloring it with the textures and the sounds of Punjab. No, I'm afraid I didn't have any conversations regarding this production with Girish Karnad. I was just too shy and too unsure and didn't really know how to approach this very iconic, extraordinary figure that Girish Karnad seemed to represent in my heart and my spirit. I'm delighted to be part of his birthday celebrations, and he is deeply missed and remembered for the wonderful, extraordinary work that he has left for all of us and for generations to come.
May 19th, Mr. Girish Karnad's birthday. If he was around, he would have been 83 years old. Of course, Mr. Karnad didn't believe in birthday celebrations and so on. I remember once a friend of his came to invite him for his 60th birthday, and Mr. Karnad said, "What is there to celebrate about a birthday? If you survive another year, you become a year older. You should celebrate your work and what you have done." So finally, the first birthday of Mr. Karnad that I ever attended was his 80th birthday celebration. Somehow his family had convinced him to agree to it. So we had his 80th birthday celebrations. And one of his friends at that party played What a Wonderful World. And I felt that that was a fitting tribute to Mr. Karnad, because whether Mr. Karnad believed that this was a wonderful world or not, he definitely wanted to fight to make it one. A lot of people have written about his playwriting, about his films. Of course, he was one of the greatest playwrights in the history of India, a great filmmaker, an actor, a man of many talents. But what we miss the most right now is his voice. Mr. Karnad was a very outspoken person, and he believed in speaking his mind, in saying what he felt was the truth, and speaking for the nation. And whatever ailed the country, he made sure that he spoke against it. Today, when there is so much apathy, lack of empathy around us, we miss that voice of Mr. Karnad. We can only hope that his strength, his work, and what he has taught us will take us all forward in his footsteps.
ರತ್ನದ ಕುಚ್ಚಿನ ಪಾವುಡ ಕೊರಲಿಗೆ ಮಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹಾರ
I found in him a great interest in art, and I thought best is to invite him to College of Art, where I was studying as a student of arts and crafts, and then expose him to the whatever we are doing there, and also to all my teachers, particularly Panikkar, who was the principal of the college. Girish took a lot of time coming to art school, seeing whatever we were doing, and then I was interested in knowing more of poetry, more of theatre, more of all those sort of things, and it was he who exposed me to best of literature, both Kannada and English, and philosophy, Camus, Sartre, Kafka, and everything possible. I was very thrilled to be in his company, because I was learning a lot from him, and this also changed my view of my art, and because and he introduced me to best of people, the theatre group, Madras Players, where I could see the plays and design their sets and design their costumes and design posters, like that. And then he introduced me to various other people like Karant, Anantmurthy, all these personalities. Of course, I had met Lankesh before at YNK's place. Then Girish was the thing is that in 1967, 1964 or 65, I think A.K. Ramanujan had come to Chennai. Girish introduced me to Ramanujan. The first time I was meeting the great poet Ramanujan, great personality. And he had written the first collection of Kannada poems called Hokkodali Huvilla, and he asked me to design the cover for that book. He designed it. And we became very good friends. We have been sort of Ramanujan acquired some of my works for his collection, and good connection we had in 1992 when he had come to my studio in Bangalore, and he said, Vasudev, you do so many drawings coming to some poems which I've done for the cover design, and it's like you editing the poems. And he said, why not to collaborate? You do drawings whichever you like, you draw, and I will read those poems. I selected about 40 poems of his, did drawings. Unfortunately, he was not there to read the poems because he was dead by the time, but I had my exhibition of these drawings. And I requested Girish, Anantamurthy, Ramchandra Sharma, Pratibhananda Kumar to read the poems, and Sakshi Gallery, which housed the exhibition, full. People had to come 3 times inside the gallery to listen to these poems. And I took the exhibition to Chennai, where Madras players did the enacting and read. Then it went to Delhi, where Sahitya Academy did the wonderful program at India International Center. And then it went to London, where Girish sponsored the exhibition at the Nehru Center. Then he went to Chicago, where Ramanujan lived and died. So the connection between poetry, between personalities, is through Girish. And Karanth, for that matter. I met Karanth through Girish when he was in the National School of Drama in Delhi. And then he was the director of National School of Drama at that time. And there was Karanth, sitting in the office. It was very much unlike Karanth sitting in an office. But when I went there, I said, meanwhile, some accountant came and put a file in front of him. And he said, look, this is what I have to do here. Ridiculous. Anyway, then Karanth came to Bangalore, and then we became very good friends again. And we went to Mysore to start Rangayana, and I went to Mysore, stayed with him, and then I did a series of drawings on what's called Hayavadana. That was the time when election was announced, and I was doing Hayavadana. I started as a cartoonist, actually, basically, caricaturist, before I came to College of Art. And so I used a character of Hayavadana as a sort of as a politician, as whatever it is, And some of the drawings, some of the cartoons, caricature, whatever it's called, the collection of National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi. And so I designed Hayavadana costumes, Hayavadana everything for Karanth in Mysore, Rangayana. That was how my relation with Girish, and he would have been 83 day, and they're great friends.
ಯಾವದೇ ಸದರಮಣ ಬಂದು ಏನ ಮೋಸವ ಮಾಡಿದ.
The main thing about plays, I think, is writing a play is like building a house. It really is. What you need is a sense of architecture. You need to fit everything in together. Let me give you an example. I mean, when my wife and I, we were going for a walk down the 15th cross. This was 20 years ago, when there were actually plots there. Now there are no plots now, because there are old buildings. And we saw a beautiful tree, a rain tree. And the rain tree was spreading, and my wife said, that's a rain tree, and what happens with the rain trees is that it has bipinnate leaves, and the leaves open up during the day and close at night. So that during the day you have shade, and at night you got moonlight. So I said, how marvelous. So we said, we'll buy this plot, which is underneath, so that we can build a terrace under the tree. We can have, dinner parties and so on under the tree, so that, during the afternoon we'll have shade, and at night we'll have moonlight. So once we decided that's where under the tree the terrace was going to be, the rest of the house virtually built itself, because once that space was there, we could have a dining room downstairs because, just the same space downstairs fitted perfectly for the dining room so that we could have a kitchen there so that from kitchen the food could come to the terrace, it could also go to the dining room. But what happens very often in the dining room is you have more people than necessary. The terrace you can limit it. With dining room, you have some more people, so we built a drawing room, living room next to it, so that if people spilt over, you could have the whole dining room and the living room, together for the space. Now, once you have the living room and so on, you cannot have, you need bathrooms for the guests, and you cannot have them next to the kitchen. So, given the kitchen, we built, bathrooms in the other corner, and then we had to have a staircase which would take you from the living room to upstairs, and so on and so on and so on. What I'm saying is that once we decided to build the house under the tree and use the terrace, the rest of the house virtually built itself. And this is what should be happening if you write a play. This is what my belief is. It may also be that I was trained in mathematics, so mathematics trains you to think like that. If A is equal to B and C is equal to D, then if C changes its value, how will it affect A? It's a kind of logic that thinks. And so I hope I'll show you how a play is, Yayati, is structured, in my mind at least, logically like this. But before I begin, let me first define what a play is. Because very often people think a play is just conversation. No, a play is not conversation. A play is dialogue. Now, there is a difference between a dialogue and a conversation. Conversation is something that happens. You are going in a train, you hear two people talking, you hear, oh, they're having a fight, or they will run away from home, or they're in love with each other. That's it. Then they get down and go, and that's the end of that. But what happens in a dialogue is that dialogue, it may be 10 minutes, it may be an hour, has to give you an idea, give the audience an idea of who they are, what are their characters, who are these people, where have they come from. I mean, much more has to be employed by the dialogue than would be said by the people, And so a dialogue is much more resonant. It has to tell you about, it has to create in your mind the characters, it has to tell you a background, it has to go on from there. And what happens in a conversation is, well, an event happens. Two people are talking, as I said. Someone may be saying, no, as soon as I go there, I have to go to the bathroom. That's it. That's nothing more than that. But in a dialogue and in a play, there has to be some kind of conflict that interests the audience, some kind of clash. Now, it need not necessarily be from opposite sides, with each other, which means, and this is the most important principle of playwriting, in a play, one character is always trying to persuade the other person. Persuade to do something. It may be persuade to fall in love. It may be to marry me, to give up your property, to run away. In Macbeth, it's Lady Macbeth who's trying to persuade Macbeth to kill someone, and so on and so on and so on. But the point is, unless this element of persuasion between two characters happens, it will not hold attention. This is what makes any relationship interesting. What does one character want out of the other character? And how is the other character responding to the first character? And this element of trying to persuasion is essential. So I would say that there are 3 or 4 elements that have to come out of a dialogue. One is that you have to know the characters, you have to know what conflict they're involved in, how they are trying to resolve the conflict or trying not to resolve the conflict, and from there, where they may have come from and where they may be going, and so on. Now, these may seem very simple principles, but they do create problems when you're writing a play. Apart from that, a play has other restrictions. One is, of course, budget. How much money do you have to make a play? How much can you spend in a play? How many characters can you have? Is it going to be a play for 3 people, 10 people, 200 people? You don't know. And that the most important restriction on a play is the capacity of the audience's bottom to sit. Because if the bottom gets tired, people leave. So you have to create a work which will make the audience forget that, they want to get up and go, or they want to go to the bathroom, or they want to go to toilet, and this to keep them entrenched. So it is, if it is a 2-hour play or a 1-hour play or whatever it is, that hour has to be packed. It has to be packed. You don't have time to, waste, because, the audience gets bored. That you have to pack the information, but at the same time, you must remember that information cannot be conveyed as it is conveyed in a novel. In a novel, you can go back, you can read, oh, I missed that, oh, what was it, who was that, what was that, Anton, who is Anton? I'll go back to page 10 and find out. In a play, you can't do that. A play just keeps on going, moving forward, so that a playwright, a consummate playwright, a playwright who knows how to write a play, will see that every moment the story will be opening, but will be related to what has happened earlier, that the relationships will be very clear, and there will be no confusion. If there is confusion, the audience loses track. Then they say, oh, but who was that? We didn't understand that. Why did it happen? And so on. So this clarity and this packing, and the very fact that ultimately no play can be longer than 2 hours, 2.5 hours today. Today it's actually 1 hour. Means that everything that you have to pack in a play has to be pressed like that. It's like a straight stick which you press. So as a result, it bends. It gets a graph. It starts with one way, you get a whole graph that goes up, and then it goes on. And this is where you come to the main point about the play, because the audience completely gets confused and is likely to leave or whatever it is. What the playwright has to know before he tries to persuade the audience to know is, what is the play about? What is happening? What is the play about? It may be that he may be deliberately misleading you. That may happen in a mystery thriller. It tells you that the play is about this and this, and suddenly say, oh, that's not what the play is about at all. It's something else. But at the end of it, the audience must get a feel that, there is, and this is what might be called the central action of the play. Bernard Shaw says that the whole plot of a play can be written on a postcard. That's all that's required. In his days, postcards are popular. If you have mobiles now, you can see the whole plot can be conveyed by SMS.
ಮಾಯಾದ ಮನದ ಭಾರ ತಗದಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲ ದ್ವಾರ ಏನಿದು ಎಂಥ ಬೆರಗ ಮಾಯಾದ ಮನದ ಭಾರ ತಗದಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲ ದ್ವಾರ ಏನಿದು ಎಂಥ ಬೆರಗ ಕಟ್ಟೊಡೆದು ಹರಿದ ನೀರ ಗಟ್ಟಡವಿ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಪೂರ ಏನಿದು ಎಂಥ ಬೆರಗ